Read my mind. Come on. Tonight's episode is, if I invented a machine and you can press a button and go anywhere in time, would you do it? Would you step back? Would you go in reverse? Or would you go forward? But keep in mind, if you go back in time, you need to remember, one small change ripples the future. It has to. It must do that. Because you figure, suppose I went back and I didn't get married in 1971. 3 children wouldn't have been born. I would have become a whore. So really, so if you set it back, and I went back to the beach where my son Kevin was at today, he broke his neck and stopped him. What would that affect? What changes would it have made in the future? Would you do that? Would you not necessarily go back in time? What about forward? Now I know you're thinking, well, if I go forward in time, it ain't going to change anything, because it hasn't happened yet. So if I went forward 1,000 years from now, and I can see what's going on, it doesn't affect anything no matter what I do. But I don't see how, if you think about it, I don't see how that would be possible. Because if I went to the future and it hasn't happened yet, isn't today going to catch up? Something to think about. I know that if I went into the past and I went back to the day my mom and dad got married or met, and I stopped that from happening, my father would not have met my mom. Wouldn't there be a ripple effect? Because as soon as time caught up, as soon as the timeline would have to catch me, and he removed me. Something to think about. How can you possibly do that? It's kind of a crazy thought. Could I go back and change history? Go back to the beach where my son was and fix the part where he broke his neck? But just think of what ripple effect it would have in the future. Maybe Kevin would have had a child. That child would grow up to be a leader, grow up to create a nuclear war, and end this planet. But, it's always possible. You can't say no. Or maybe he would have went to war and he would have got married over there and created something. A whole bunch of hillbillies in Afghanistan. Could you imagine Afghanistan full of hillbillies? I'm being stupid, but think about it. So what paradox would you believe that would happen? You go forward, and you can see the future. You can see what's going to happen. Maybe you just go forward 2 more years to see if Trump runs again. But even if you knew, or say I knew the winning lottery numbers in next week's drawing, and I just went 1 week, and I got those numbers, how would I return? But what if I did return and I had those numbers? Would those numbers still be the same? But I think more of the past, because a lot of people would say, well, I would go back in time and I would fix this, or I'd want to change this, or I want to change this. But the paradox from that would be tremendous. Even though my family is just a small ripple in the people in the United States, but you don't know what that, like I said, you don't know what that small pebble could have done. Or maybe Kevin would have became a scientist and just and made a plutonium bomb that's only this big. And on the way to the lab, he drops it and boom, cracks the planet's core, and everybody dies. What do you think? Do you believe in time travel? Do you think it's possible? But like I said, there's a paradox going forward. But I think there's more of a paradox if you go back, because if you go back and do anything to change me, my being, it would have to catch up to me and eliminate me. It would have to. How could it not? How could I still live if I changed something, anything in the past that would affect my life? I mean, anything to do with my mom and dad, or their mom and dad, if you went back even farther, you know what I mean? Or anything that could possibly affect my being. It would have, the timeline would have to catch up and eliminate me somehow. It would be a temporal thing. But if you went into the future, I don't see it changing anything. If you stay, like I said, if my time machine was one way, you press the button, you set the timer first. Let's see, I want to go ahead 100 years. But even if you set it ahead a week, and you got those winning numbers, you couldn't do anything about it. Unless the time machine would only last for a short time and then it would return you. Then you return with a lottery ticket. Couldn't be the lottery ticket, but you could return with something on a piece of paper saying on this date, these are the winning lottery numbers. But if the time machine was a one-way ticket, you couldn't change anything. Absolutely couldn't change anything. And would you remember the past? Would you remember the past? Because if you jump to the future, I guess I would imagine you would remember the past. But what if you jump to the past? Would you lose the future? I know that if you made one change, the paradox of change would if you did something to change anything at all. And a lot of people say, well, I wouldn't change anything. I would just live back in those days. But you being there is always a chance that a little something that you do is a ripple effect and changes the future. What if I went back in the old days where I could carry a 6-gun and go around being a gunslinger? You know what I mean? And I was on the range riding around looking for something to shoot, and here comes a dude and I pop him, and it's Abraham Lincoln. I wouldn't know who he. I mean, if I seen him with that stupid hat on, but that's old Abe, man. Was Abe? I just popped him. Just imagine the paradox of the future. So I wonder, you ever think about that? You ever think about what would happen if I could go back, or what would happen? Wouldn't it be nice to see the future in 100 years? I mean, 100 years ain't that far away. But the way our planet's going now, I think 100 years is a real long time. I'm not sure how we're going to last 100 years. More or less 3 more years. Something will happen. I mean, good or bad, something's going to change something. But I'm just saying, wouldn't it be interesting to be, and would you do it? I'm curious, and leave a remark saying whether you would go or not. Or would you believe it? I mean, would you believe it would even be possible? I mean, scientists can create a lot of stuff. And I'm sure that as the future goes on, things are going to get more and more, So it'd be an interesting thing to be able to go back and see something that's, go back and actually live through something, or go back to Egypt, to a rock and hit Goliath, and he comes and kills me instead of David. You know what I mean? I just wonder. I don't know. I'm just sitting here watching movies and stuff on Netflix, and thought to myself, wouldn't that be cool, man? If I had a time machine, I could go forward and back. One that was adjustable, to where I could go to the future and look, come back. I don't know if I'd want to come back, especially if the future was something really awesome. But would the timeline get me? I would think it would. Because if I went 100 years, I would still be my age 100 years from now. But I died in a real life in 2030, or 40, or 50. So what happens with that? If it was possible. All this is just what if. But wouldn't that be cool, though? I would love to be able to. I don't know if as I talk about this, I don't know if I'd want to do this. If I had that machine in my hand, I'd be saying, you know what, if we go back, I could change the future to what I think it should be. But who the hell am I? But if I went to the future, I don't think it would change anything. It'd be nice to see the future, see where we're heading. But even if it was something bad, you can't. You couldn't come. Even if you could return, you can say, okay, now I have to stop just for, say, Trump. What do I do? Do I go back in time to when Trump's mom and dad was at the beach, getting ready to get some booty going, and I interrupt it, and I cut his father's wiener off so he couldn't make Trump? Would that stop the future? No. I think it would change the future somehow. Oh, I'm sure it would. But I wonder, but how do you know what your changes are going to affect? You think, well, without Trump, man, we wouldn't have all this hatred and shit going on. But there'd be something else. This is all what ifs. Something to think about. Science is badass. I've always loved science, but imagine if you had a little box in your hand and you can go back or forward, would you? Or would you destroy it? Because think about it, if somebody else got that box, maybe they'd go back and say, I hated that Jim Brown, he was an asshole. I'm going to fix him. Stop my mother and father. The Blue Knight takes care of the whole family. But there's a lot of kids involved too. My children and their children and their children. And we eliminate all that. Just a thought. Just a thought.